love, romance, desire, companionship, these have always been central in media. I've always enjoyed well-crafted romance stories, but lately, something has been bothering me. This past summer, I was at home with some friends watching the most popular show of the moment. Listening to them complain about Jeremiah and beg Belly to take Conrad back, I had a sudden thought. Why is Conrad so desirable? What is it about him that makes the internet almost unanimously want Belly to choose him? And that got me thinking, how has the role of the male love interest evolved? What do we even ask of these men today? So here I am, 3 months later. In this video, I'm breaking down how the male lead in romance has evolved, and why, in just a few years, the way we write and relate to these men has changed completely. Spoilers for Twilight, The Hunger Games, One Day, Normal People, and The Summer I Turned Pretty. Also, brief disclaimer, English is not my first language, so if I make any mistakes, please forgive me. Okay, so I won't dive too deep into this because I could be talking about this for ages. And maybe I would do a video on this later on if you enjoy this one. But I do believe that before analyzing contemporary male characters, it is important to briefly trace how romance has evolved in cinema. These shifts do not only redefine women on screen, they also fundamentally reshape how men are allowed to desire, love, and fail.
What's the matter with you anyway?
Let me go.
No.
Fred, please let me go.
Let's get something straight. I am not now, nor have I ever been Fred. Nor am I Benny Shacklet, whoever he may be. My name is Paul. Paul Varjak, and I love you.
Let me go.
You're crazy.
What, do you think you own me?
That's exactly what I think.
I know that's what everybody always thinks, but everybody happens to be wrong.
Well, I am not everybody. Or am I?
During the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, romantic cinema framed male desire as unquestionable and morally authoritative. Men did not need to explain why they loved. Their longing was treated as inherently meaningful. Female characters existed largely to validate that desire through sacrifice, often paying a narrative price when they challenged social norms. Films like Roman Holiday, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and West Side Story present men whose passion is legitimized by women's suffering or self-erasure.
You know, you think you can just pass me around to your friends? I'm not some little toy.
No, you're not my toy. I know you're not my toy. Vivian, I'm speaking to you. Come back here. I hate to point out the obvious, but you are in fact a hooker, and you are my employee.
Look, you don't own me. I decide, okay? I say who, I say when, I say who.
I refuse to spend the next 3 days fighting with you. I said I was sorry. I meant it. That's the end of it.
It was stupid and cruel. I didn't mean it. I don't want you to go. Can you stay the week?
Why?
I saw you talking to David Morris. I didn't like it.
We were just talking.
During the 90s and 80s, romantic cinema began to destabilize this certainty. Male desire became more neurotic and self-aware. Men were insecure, ironic, and emotionally conflicted, yet still central. Their vulnerability was framed as depth rather than failure, and the story continued to privilege their interiority. Movies like Pretty Woman, Grease, or When Harry Met Sally reflect this shift where romance is questioned, but still filtered primarily through the male point of view.
Okay.
Really?
I'm not a concept, Joel. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. I'm not perfect.
I can't see anything that I don't like about you.
But you
right
will.
Now, I can't.
But you will. You know, you will think of things. And I'll get bored with you and feel trapped because that's what happens with me.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
By the 1990s and early 2000s, male desire shifted again. It became more physical, obsessive, and emotionally underexplained. Men yearned intensely, but narratives often refused to articulate why, leaving their interior worlds opaque. Desire was aestheticized rather than examined. Films like Titanic, 10 Things I Hate About You, or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind exemplify an era where male longing was powerful and central yet rarely interrogated. I also do not think there is anything inherently wrong with loving these films. I, for instance, genuinely enjoy some of the films I've mentioned. However, it is important to question what they reveal about the societies in which they were written and produced, and, perhaps more importantly, why they resonated so strongly with audiences in the first place. At the same time, it is worth reflecting on the romance genre itself. And I want to be clear here. I do not want to fall into the familiar argument that romance is somehow a weaker or less serious literary or cinematic genre. This perception did not emerge by accident, nor is it neutral. Romance has been critically dismissed for decades largely because it appeals to women. For a long time, romance was one of the very few genres where women occupied a central role. Even when its narratives were openly misogynistic, romance was still largely written by women and consumed by women, unlike most other mainstream genres, which historically centered male experience and male desire. Because of this, romance became both popular and culturally devalued. But romance had its good things within the bad. It functioned as a form of escape. For many women, it offered relief from a world that was often hostile, dismissive, or actively humiliating. From being mocked by classmates, to dealing with emotionally unavailable or addicted partners, to teachers who belittled you, to families demanding you behave like a lady, romance offered an alternative reality. In these stories, there was often a male figure who not only noticed you, but truly desired you, and that desire mattered. Women in romance novels were frequently written as ordinary girls, often oblivious to their own beauty, yet still deemed worthy of love, devotion, and respect from men who were emotionally strong, protective, and attentive. This was not accidental. It directly countered a real world that constantly told women they were either invisible or insufficient. One particularly common trope in 2010's romance was the protective male lead, the man who shielded the female protagonist from other men. It was not unusual for female protagonists to be placed in situations of near sexual violence, harassment, or overt misogyny, only for the male love interest to intervene and save her. This fantasy, while deeply problematic, reveals something important. Romance was responding to women's lived fears. It offered safety, recognition, and desire in a culture that so often denied all three. Romance, then, was never simply about love. It was about being seen, being chosen, and, however imperfectly, being protected in a world that rarely offered protection at all. Romance also allowed women to express a form of sexual desire that was otherwise shamed or silenced. Historically, nothing inherently sexual had ever been targeted toward women. Sex, for us, was almost always framed by men as something that naturally followed love, not as something a woman desired on her own terms, but as something we could only want if it was accompanied by real emotional commitment. Female sexuality was constructed as something women granted to men in exchange for devotion, affection, or long-term security, not something they should want for themselves. Romantic novels and films thus took an interesting turn in their portrayal of sex, something I will address shortly, but more importantly, they offered women a new way to articulate and explore sexual desire without being shamed for it. It was not uncommon, and I am the first one guilty of this, no shame in it, to see a classmate or friend in middle school with her nose buried in a romance or erotic novel, precisely because these texts provided one of the few socially acceptable spaces in which young women could engage with emerging sexual desire without fear of judgment. Moreover, in real life, sex was, for a lot of women, not pleasurable nor followed by commitment, and the displays of it in other types of media, or porn, was something that didn't seem pleasurable either. So, romance novels, and this remains true even today, wrote sexual interactions very differently than what they were accustomed. There was yearning, prolonged anticipation, and an emphasis on foreplay. Male characters were often depicted as prioritizing the woman's desire first, focusing on making her feel wanted and satisfied before attending to their own needs. This created the illusion of an egalitarian exchange. I give you what you desire, and you give me what I desire in return. Both partners leave the encounter fulfilled, a fantasy that stood in sharp contrast to the lived reality of heterosexual sex for many women, where pleasure is frequently sidelined and the experience often ends when the man finishes. Notably, these sexual scenes were usually delayed, sometimes not appearing until a second book in a series, and were preceded by extensive yearning and emotional buildup. Sex was not portrayed as something the man rushed toward or prioritized. Instead, it occurred only once both characters collectively decided that the moment was right. This may seem like a sideline, but it helps explain a broader cultural shift in the 2010s. One reason why not only heterosexual romance, but especially male-male romantic relationships became so popular, first in fan fiction spaces and later in mainstream projects once cultural homophobia slightly receded, finally, is that these relationships offered a vision of sexual and emotional equity that heterosexual narratives often failed to provide. For many women, stories centered on two male protagonists removed the entrenched power imbalance of heterosexual romance. Without a woman positioned as the default sexual gatekeeper or emotional caretaker, desire could be depicted as mutual, negotiated, and evenly distributed. Both characters were allowed to yearn, hesitate, and prioritize each other's pleasure without falling into familiar gendered scripts. I do not believe that the romance genre is inherently lesser or weaker. On the contrary, it has historically responded to many of the demands and desires expressed by women in different periods. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge that these narratives often reinforced misogynistic ideas that were deeply internalized by women themselves in each historical context. This leads to a crucial question. Why do we continue to devalue romance by assuming it is only for women? Is it because men do not desire it? Or is it rather that men have traditionally been positioned as the protagonists of almost every other form of media, while women were largely confined to narratives that revolved around men? In this sense, romance may not reflect women's limitations, but the limitations imposed on what women were allowed to write, read, and imagine. Let's bring back our timeline. If we are going to talk about the 2010s, it is important to highlight the two most dominant strands of romance during that decade. The first is the passive woman versus the desiring man. In franchises such as Twilight, the female protagonist is emotionally passive, defined almost entirely by her devotion and availability. Meanwhile, the male character desires constantly. He watches, protects, and longs. However, the narrative never interrogates why he desires in this way. Edward's desire is obsessive, intense, and all-consuming, yet it remains unexplored and opaque. Bella, by contrast, exists primarily as an object of desire rather than as a fully developed partner. Male desire in these stories is powerful but narratively hollow, lacking introspection or emotional complexity. The woman, even when she reciprocates affection, functions more as a vessel for the male gaze and longing than as an agent of desire in her own right. The male character chooses a woman precisely because of her passivity, reinforcing the illusion that such passivity is desirable. In stark contrast, as a response to these romances in which women were largely passive, our beloved Girlboss was born. And let me be very clear about one thing. This is misogyny answered with misogyny. Again, I am not going to dwell too much on this radical shift in how this transformation took place. From woman as a static subject onto whom desire is projected, to the narrative focal point and driving force of the entire story. What must be made clear, however, is that, and I'm sorry to those who do not want to hear this, most so-called radical changes in which one definition of womanhood moves from being desired to being socially despised, while another term resurfaces, tend to be more of the same. The girl boss and not like other girls trend is nothing more than a reaction to these passive characters. Instead of confronting the reasons why such characters were written that way, namely that women were seen as more desirable within a misogynistic society when they functioned as vessels onto which desire could be projected, these narratives chose to attack this type of character, or women in real life who embodied those traits. Femininity began to be condemned. Being a girl who likes girly things stopped being cool. Makeup was replaced with a bow and arrow, skirts and modest sweaters with tight leather jumpsuits, and being desired by the boy you like, or being turned into a vampire by him, with saving a society corrupted by tyranny and totalitarianism.
If you die, and I live, I'd have nothing. Nobody else that I care about.
Peter.
It's different for you. Your family needs you.
What about you?
Nobody needs me.
I do. I need you.
And so, she was born, the girl boss. Here, women are no longer passive objects waiting to be rescued. In dystopian sagas, women become the central agents of the story. They make decisions, fight, and rebel. They are the chosen one, teenage girls tasked with saving society from fascism or broken governments. Competent, active, and capable of shaping their own destiny, often within high-stakes or dystopian narratives. However, do not be fooled. These stories continue to tie female agency to romance. Even the strongest heroines are frequently required to participate in a love story, reinforcing the idea that romantic connection remains a central measure of a woman's value. No matter how often the narrative insists on, not like other girls, or my desire is no longer based on being liked by a man, the protagonist's strength, independence, or uniqueness is emphasized almost always within a framework that ultimately validates male attention or partnership. For a long time, I took this as an absolute truth, but during my research, I realized that it is more of a rumor. I believe that Suzanne Collins, author of The Hunger Games, had not included a love triangle in her initial drafts. There is no evidence to support this claim. What we do know, however, is that her editor, Kate Egan, mentioned in an interview that she asked Suzanne to develop the love triangle further, as it was not as central to the narrative. What are Suzanne Collins' strengths and weaknesses as a writer, and how do you help her as an editor? Storytelling is Suzanne's strength. As an editor, I help her develop the characters. For example, I asked her for more of the Peeta, Katniss, Gale love triangle. Suzanne was more focused on the war story. This is important because The Hunger Games does something very interesting and stands out as the best YA dystopian work in the genre. Something that many later novels attempting to replicate its success completely misunderstood. Peeta, let us set Gale aside for a moment, or forever please, fulfills a role very different from that of the traditional male love interest. He is compassionate, empathetic, and emotionally aware, in stark contrast to the usual strong stoic hero archetype. This is partly due to privilege. Katniss has not had the luxury of processing her emotions. She is preoccupied with keeping her family alive, while Peeta, even though his family is not the best, has never had to worry about having food on the table. Nevertheless, Katniss is the one who physically saves Peeta almost every time they are in danger, while Peeta is the one who saves Katniss emotionally, acting as her primary emotional support. Traditional gender roles are inverted. Katniss protects, Peeta listens. In most other dystopian sagas, many of them, watered-down copies of what The Hunger Games originally was, this nuance is lost. The girl is the fighter, the savior, but her love interest, despite not being the chosen one, is often portrayed either as the default active hero or as a narrative vessel designed to allow her vulnerability. In both cases, the male character occupies a central position. He either competes with the protagonist in heroism or absorbs the emotional burden she is not allowed to carry on her own. Women are allowed to fight, but when they do, they are often emotionally absent. This is another key point, what the so-called girl-boss era of feminism largely lacked, and this is a very broad observation, was nuance. Traits traditionally coded as masculine, such as assertiveness, decisiveness, and moral strength, were transferred to female protagonists but stripped of subtlety or complexity. Both women and men wrote female characters who were denied the privilege of moral ambiguity. Male protagonists could be morally flawed or emotionally chaotic as long as they ultimately made the right decisions. Female protagonists, by contrast, were rarely granted the same complexity, partly because audiences were assumed to be less forgiving, and partly because authors themselves lacked the courage to make them truly broken or morally ambiguous. As a result, the heroine of these narratives had to be morally impeccable, strong, and decisive, perfect in almost every sense, while simultaneously being paired with a male character capable of providing what she was narratively denied: emotional depth, vulnerability, or moral orientation. The man's presence did not merely accompany her arc, it functioned as a compensatory mechanism, absorbing the audience's doubts about her character and legitimizing her hardness or apparent emotional coldness. Ultimately, the girl boss era expanded the limits of what women could do, but not always those of what they were allowed to feel, care for, or be. At this point, it becomes clear that the transformation of contemporary romance is not only about how women are written, but fundamentally about how men are allowed or required to exist within these narratives. During the 2010s, male characters were permitted a limited form of emotional openness, particularly within dystopian narratives, largely because women carried the full weight of agency, action, and narrative responsibility. With the female protagonist positioned as the fighter, the savior, and the moral center, men could afford to be softer, more emotionally expressive, or more caring. However, this emotional availability was rarely explored in depth. The origins of male vulnerability remained largely uninterrogated, and male characters were often reduced to narrative vessels through which female protagonists could access or display their own caring, nurturing, or emotionally vulnerable sides. Men were not granted emotional subjectivity so much as emotional functionality. Recent romance marks a significant shift in this dynamic. Masculinity is no longer treated as a static ideal to be admired, endured, or softened by female love, but as a site of internal conflict, self-awareness, and ethical responsibility. These narratives require male characters to confront their own emotional limitations, rather than outsourcing that labor to female protagonists. Male interiority becomes legible, accountable, and relational, not because a woman needs it, but because the narrative demands it. This reconfiguration of male subjectivity creates the conditions for a new articulation of desire, one in which men are not merely catalysts for female emotional expression, but full subjects whose growth, failure, and self-reflection are central to the romantic arc itself. Now, if we consider that we do not live in societies ruled by broken or fascist governments, or, well, we do, but we are not the ones given a tight leather suit, a bow and arrow, and a narrative that promises we can overthrow those systems, romance must adapt to more relatable everyday situations. When the era of dystopian stories finally died down, other genres of romance emerged, or repopularized. Many of these followed familiar patterns. Women portrayed as generally passive, quirky, or relatable, in the dullest sense of the word, paired with emotionally distant men who only become fully present once love unlocks their emotional core. This resurgence reflects the persistent misogyny of society, framing women as saviors of men who are broken inside, with the men's initial sexual desire positioning the female protagonist as the object and motivator of emotional healing. The reverse also occurs. It's not only the man who carries a tragic past, the woman often does as well. But rather than exploring how trauma shapes her character, the narrative resolves her struggles once a man enters her life. Instead of examining emotional problems on their own or showing how the woman navigates them within society, the male character validates her existence and worth, and through him, her trauma is healed. It is common, for example, in books, to see the trope of a woman trapped in an abusive relationship who only escapes when another man enters the story. Not overtly abusive, but sometimes still psychologically controlling. And yet, there are a few stories praised by both women and men that stand out from this turbulent sea of misogynistic and mediocre romance. Normal People, both the book and the adaptation, One Day, the recent Netflix adaptation, and even The Summer I Turned Pretty have become cultural touchstones, partially redefining what we understand as romance. So, what sets these stories apart? Let's focus on 3 key points.
It's not about any of that, Belly. It's... Fuck, I still love you. I don't think I'll ever get you out of my system. You will always be there, here. Remember that night in the motel? When I told you that I still wanted you? I couldn't sleep that night. I loved you. I know I did. But I knew that if I kept you with me, I would hurt you, and so... I couldn't have that. Belly.
Don't say it.
Don't be with him. Don't marry him. Be with me.
The appeal of yearning, that intense, sometimes almost painful desire typical of romance, remains a central element in contemporary narratives. However, it now comes with a significant twist. We actually understand the woman they're longing for. Our female characters are presented first as fully realized individuals. They have flaws, complexities, and personal histories. The story introduces them in a way that allows us to understand who they are, their family background, social context, and interpersonal relationships. This makes the male character's longing interdependent with the female protagonist, who is fully developed and known to the audience. Here is a crucial point. It's not only that we, as readers or viewers, know her, but we also see how the male protagonist perceives her. We see what he understands about her, what he misses, and how their perspectives intersect. Through this lens, the construction of a romantic relationship becomes much clearer. We understand, even before conflict arises, why the conflicts appear in the first place. It's not just important who these characters are individually, but who they are to each other. This answers the question of why they fall in love, and why the relationship, if it ends, breaks apart. Romance is no longer simply a narrative vehicle to motivate the female character or to catalyze her psychological development. The male character's desire is meaningful, narratively justified, and emotionally resonant.
Just pick up the phone, Emma. If you're there, just pick up. It's been an unbelievably shitty day.
In these modern romances, the male character is morally complex, just like the female protagonist. However, this moral ambiguity does not revolve around simple notions of good and evil, or solely around unresolved trauma stemming from external events. Instead, it emerges from nuanced personal conflicts, insecurity, indecision, miscommunication, or the struggle to reconcile desire with personal values. It's not simply a matter of, my father was abusive, my mother died, or my parents cheated, and therefore I behave this way. If such events exist, they are not presented as the ultimate justification for the character's actions. Rather, the narrative explores how these experiences manifest in the character, shaping them and influencing their behavior. For example, in The Summer I Turned Pretty, we understand that Conrad's actions, or more often, his inaction, toward Belly arise in response to the awareness that his mother is dying. But it is not his mother's death that fundamentally defines him. Conrad is naturally reserved, closed off, and unable to open up emotionally. The external events simply trigger behaviors consistent with his personality. We understand his motivations even when his resulting actions are harmful, and we do not excuse them. And here's the thing. The romance cannot progress until the flaw driving these behaviors is confronted, until he is able to open up to Belly. In all these stories, even though we see the character flaws and why they doom the relationship, we need to see progress in them, healing done by the character himself in order for the romantic relationship to succeed. Moreover, Sometimes there is no traumatic event at all. A character's traits emerge inherently from their personality, shaped by how they perceive and navigate the world. In Normal People, for example, Connell makes morally questionable decisions, such as keeping his relationship with Marianne a secret. It is easy for the audience to see that this is wrong, yet we also understand Connell's inner conflict, who he is with Marianne versus who he is with his friends. His choices, even when flawed, reflect his worldview and his way of interacting with others. Connell is intellectually curious, but struggles to share that with his peers. Simultaneously, he craves social connection and recognition, and he fears that revealing his intimacy with Marianne will disrupt the lens through which his friends see him. Connell does not act out of trauma. He acts according to the way he experiences and navigates the world. These flaws feel human and relatable rather than merely symbolic. Their mistakes, misjudgments, and internal contradictions are understandable within the context of their lived experiences. Crucially, these flaws are not about dominating or controlling others. They are about navigating life, relationships, and emotions in ways that feel authentic. Both protagonists are imperfect, and both bear responsibility for their own emotional growth. Romance becomes a shared journey rather than a one-sided projection of need or desire.
Did you ever think about asking me to the depths? I know it's such a stupid thing, but I'm curious whether you thought about it.
To be honest, no. Yeah, I wish that I did. Yeah. Would you suggest? I'm really sorry. I feel really guilty about all that stuff I said to you about how bad it would be if people found out. Like, obviously that was just what was going on in my head, and there'd be no reason why anybody would care. I think I just suffer from anxiety with those sort of things. I don't know. Yeah. I still think about it all the time. I still think about why I acted in such a fucked up way, and I'm really sorry.
It is impossible and unrealistic to separate male characters from the pressures and norms of toxic masculinity, because these pressures are part of the society in which they live. However, in contemporary romance, these traits are framed differently. Men sometimes fall into forms of toxic masculinity, but these are no longer abusive, possessive, or violent. Instead, toxicity manifests through struggles such as difficulty expressing emotions and persistent problems with communication. These issues arise from how the characters are constructed, both men and women, and while they are sometimes paired with external events, they are not caused by those events alone. I should note that the miscommunication trope, when overused, can feel vague and repetitive. However, when done well, it is deeply relatable. Rather than relying on the classic device of overhearing half a conversation and jumping to conclusions, these stories often show how the established traits of one character clash with those of the other. I failed to express myself fully. You misunderstood what I meant, and now it feels too late to fix it. It becomes a combination of personal, emotional blockages and the timing of the relationship itself. Another form of toxicity appears in the pressure to conform to social stereotypes of masculinity, even when these norms actively harm the characters and their relationships. For example, Conrad distances himself from Belly because he is emotionally unwell, believing that his inability to provide physical and emotional support at that moment would hurt her more than leaving her would. This clearly stems from the mistaken belief that men are not allowed to suffer or be weak within relationships. Had Conrad opened up to Belly and communicated his inability to give her what he believes she needs? Another manifestation of toxic masculinity, deciding what a woman needs without asking her. They could have jointly decided whether to continue the relationship despite those limitations, or to end it if Belly also felt they were too much to bear. Dexter, on the other hand, initially uses sex and sexuality as a form of escape. He is unable to commit to a relationship that would be good for him, no matter how much he cares, because commitment does not align with how he understands romantic relationships. For him, it is easier to keep Emma as a friend, someone with whom he can be emotionally open, though never fully, and desire on a sexual level without the responsibility of commitment. It is emotional safety without equal emotional investment in return. Crucially, the characters themselves are aware of these flaws. They recognize that adhering to these ideals, whether through stoicism, suppressing vulnerability, or prioritizing appearance over genuine connection, can harm both themselves and those around them. This awareness allows the audience to empathize with them and to understand toxic traits as part of a broader emotional and social context, rather than as inherent or irredeemable failures. And importantly, none of these men exert domination over women. Ironically, and this could easily be the subject of another essay, they are often more passive than their female counterparts. This raises an interesting question. Is it possible, and in what ways, to write a so-called active male character who does not resort to unforgivable forms of toxic masculinity, such as extreme jealousy, physical force, or emotional domination? These men are appealing precisely because they represent equity within a relationship, but this often means they are passive in some way, either physically or emotionally. Is there a world in which one could write a man who is assertive while still fitting this model? Something to think about. What contemporary romance ultimately offers is not the erasure of masculinity, nor a denial of its social conditioning, but a reframing of it. These stories allow male characters to be flawed without being oppressive, vulnerable without being infantilized, and desirable without exercising control. In doing so, they move romance away from fantasies of domination or emotional salvation and towards something far more compelling: mutual recognition, shared responsibility, and emotional parity. Romance becomes not a space where one partner fixes the other, but where both are seen, challenged, and allowed to grow. The appeal of these male characters is not accidental, nor is it simply a matter of good writing. It reflects a broader shift in how female desire is articulated in contemporary culture. After decades of romances that oscillated between passive women and emotionally absent men, or hyper-competent women paired with narratively hollow love interests, these stories offer something different: men who are emotionally legible. Women are no longer being asked to desire men because they are powerful, dominant, or mysterious in ways that erase interiority. Instead, desire is rooted in recognition. These characters are appealing because we understand them. We see their contradictions, their fears, their moments of emotional cowardice, and their attempts, sometimes clumsy, sometimes failed, to do better. Desire emerges not despite their flaws, but through them. Crucially, these men do not position women as emotional laborers or saviors. The relationship is not built on the fantasy that a woman's love will fix a broken man. Emotional growth is depicted as something the male character must actively pursue himself. The woman is not a reward, nor a tool for healing, but a subject with her own boundaries, needs, and agency. This fundamentally alters the power dynamics of romance. Female desire in these narratives is no longer aligned with submission or self-erasure, nor with the performance of emotional invulnerability. It is aligned with equity. To desire a man is to desire someone who is capable of reflection, accountability, and emotional presence, even when he fails. Especially when he fails and is forced to confront those failures. This is why Yearning works differently now. It is no longer about distance for the sake of tension or silence mistaken for depth. It is about longing that is grounded in mutual knowledge. We want these men not because they are unattainable, but because they are visible, because they see the woman fully and in doing so, reveal themselves. In this sense, contemporary romance does not abandon fantasy, it redefines it. The fantasy is no longer domination, rescue, or emotional withholding. The fantasy is being met as an equal, by someone who is willing to sit with discomfort, to communicate imperfectly, and to grow alongside you. And that, perhaps, is the most radical reimagining of romance we have seen so far. If you liked the video, please subscribe and leave a like. I would also love to hear your opinions. It helps me a lot to keep making videos, so don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd be answering every single one. Thanks for watching.